So like you have to hop on this jellyfish, and then once you're on top of the jellyfish, it's just a quick 1.5 minute ride up to the next level. I swear Throne of the Tides is OP. It's gonna be great.
Okay, do we think that elevator ride is going to make it into M plus, or do you think that's getting changed?
I don't know. I think that's probably the discussion point for today's video.
Yeah.
So basically, we're going to be talking about the 10.2 dungeon pool that got announced. Throne of the Tides, as we were talking about, is one of the dungeons. The other 7 dungeons that we're going to be seeing this season are Everbloom, Atal'Dazar, Waycrest Manor, Blackrock Hold, Darkheart Thicket, and then the 2 Dawn of the Infinite dungeons, which are Galakron's Fall and Murozon's Rise. How are they breaking up these Dawn of the Infinite ones, by the way?
It's just first 4 bosses, last 4 bosses. So
Okay.
the first 4 up to Iridikron, and then the last 4, after that.
So we are going to be talking about the dungeons that we've seen so far. Kind of some of the pitfalls that I think that they need to be watching out for moving into 10.2 that we've kind of seen with like the refurbished dungeons just as a whole. And then just kind of generally give our thoughts on like what the dungeon pool is. Right off the bat, I mean, what's your initial impression on this?
I would say reasonably happy. This seems like a pretty good set of dungeons. I liked Atal'Dazar, and I also thought that Atal'Dazar was a dungeon that had a few small things you could tweak to make it really, really good. So
Sure.
I'm optimistic there. I liked Waycrest Manor. Again, one very small thing of just the door RNG at the start, and I'll be happy. So yeah, overall, I would say reasonably happy with this. I'm surprised to not see more Dragonflight dungeons in here. I'm surprised it's 6 returning dungeons and no season 1 or 2 dungeons.
Whenever we were kind of spitballing like what we kind of expected to see, I think everybody kind of anticipated the 2 Dawn dungeons plus 2 other Dragonflight dungeons in some form or fashion.
Because it just, I mean, I guess, so the next season could be like all Dragonflight dungeons. Could be like season 1 and 2, just the Dragonflight dungeons from them, plus Dawn of the Infinite, but that's 10. So maybe you cut 2 of the most Ruby Life Pools dungeons from there or something.
I mean, Ruby's a 30-minute. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. It's short, but I didn't like that place. Maybe that's just because I was playing Brought Warrior.
Sure.
But yeah, so that like maybe that would work. But because otherwise, if each Dragonflight dungeon only gets 1 season, this expansion, I feel like that would be like that's only 6 months per dungeon, right? It used to be a dungeon would get 2 years, 2.5 years on its first expansion. I'm not sure. Like, is that enough if it's only 6 months each?
I mean, do we not expect a 10 dungeon season? Is there?
So there
I guess
could
there's
be
a question of like a
season. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or two. I mean, there could be a season 4. Like, so we don't know yet if there is a 10.3 with a raid and stuff. I think there will be. But then even after that, so there could be a season 4 or season 5 even, like a fated season 5.
Okay.
If there's a reasonably long season 4. So there's a lot of possibilities still. I'm just surprised that there aren't any other Dragonflight dungeons in this pool. I don't think it's bad or anything, but it does go against what I was expecting to see.
I will say, coming into the expansion, I think what I expected was 4 refurb, 4 Dragonflight for season 1, 4 refurb for Dragonflight for season 2, and then all Dragonflight for season 3. That's kind of actually what I expected coming into the expansion. Now that we've seen this, it's actually kind of interesting. I will say that the dungeon selection that they've been picking, I would say I'm reasonably happy with it. Like you were saying, though, Atal'Dazar and Waycrest Manor, I think that they actually have a lot of work to do in Atal'Dazar, surprisingly enough. I think that that's a dungeon that people actually hold in pretty high regard, but without things such as Awaken skipping with pillars, the scaling with some of the mobs that you basically can't pull in that dungeon, and snapping as a mechanic, I think that Atal has a lot of changes on the horizon.
Yeah, so do we want to just kind of go dungeon by dungeon and talk about those things?
I think so, yeah. And I think we can start with like Atal and Waycrest, since those are the most recent dungeons that people been talking about. Like I alluded to earlier, yeah, I think that Atal, I think the big thing is like, what are they going to do about snapping? So philosophically, they've changed how snapping functions in World of Warcraft as a whole. Like what mobs do whenever they have no path to like the tank and how they snap. It's functionally a little bit different with how they like evade out and whatnot. Now, if you go back into Atal'Dazar right now on like an M0 and you pull the mobs, they work exactly the same. So it's coded at like a mob level, not like a dungeon level. But like,
Yeah, and that's always been true, right? Because like bosses would snap you to them, and mobs would snap to you. But some mobs would evade, and now they've got this tech of the mobs evading and then snapping and then evading, which is a lot less useful than when they just snapped. It's still useful. People still do snaps in some cases, but it is more fiddly, right? And it's a higher setup cost, something you wouldn't just do for like 6 pulls in a row, but you would instead do for one big pull. Which, yeah, I mean, maybe there will still be a way to do that if they make that change. But like you said, right now, Atal'Dazar still works the way that it used to because it's coded per mob. It's not like game-wide behavior.
Yeah.
So I expect that they will change how that functions. And I hope that if they do, they look at the toxic Zorids at least and make sure that those aren't too nasty to fight.
I'm looking at honor guards and the Goliaths, the purifiers. I think are actually the names of those mobs. The big, I'm talking about the elemental
Yeah,
dudes.
the construct things.
Yeah. I think that those are the two mobs that I'm maybe looking at. Also, in general, is like what are those going to look like coming into this into this dungeon? I think that this is a dungeon that will not have the exact same identity as it was back in BFA.
For me, the reanimated honor guards were pretty offensive in BFA.
Yeah, agree.
There's two of them that stand in front of the boss on the right side,
Volcall, yeah.
And you basically could not pull those if you were within like 4 or 5 key levels of your maximum, right? Like if you could do 20 keys and you went into a weekly 15, you could maybe get away with it, but you couldn't any higher than that. Like you're doing a 17, it was still not feasible to pull that pack of two reanimated honor guards.
I wonder what.
So I hope they change that because I feel like anytime there's just a pull that says, "Hey, you got to skip me," that's not good.
I wonder what Trash is gonna look like in there too, because Trash was like always. I guess we did do that first pull on the left side with like the juggernauts and all the casters and stuff like that, which wasn't like the most direct route. But I felt like count in there was always a bit weird because you had to do skips.
Yeah. So again, like I hope they look at the count again. They fix the mobs so that none of them are too bad to fight. No packs are unreasonable, and then they give you a nice kind of you'll get 100% by holding W. You can get you can skip stuff and then pull stuff from the sides if you want instead. Because the way it works, like you could go through the middle of that dungeon, right? Or you could go back around the outside again. There was a lot of different.
Well, no, you couldn't go through. You couldn't go through the middle first, right?
Not first, no, but you could clear from the right to the left or vice versa through the middle. Because
you had to open up the door with the lever. I think that there's a chance that they should actually just make that dungeon like if you held W, it'd be like 85%. Then you have, or like even 90%. Then you have optionality as to what you pull off to the side.
Yeah, as long as it's as long as you're not going over 100 by holding W, which that was the kind of the problem with BFA was there were a lot of dungeons where if you held W, you would go over 100%, and you'd just be like, man, if we don't do skips here, we are way slow. And that was part of why Rogue was so good that whole expansion.
So, Waycrest Manor, obviously the most other recent dungeon. I think that, so they've actually done a lot of dungeon tuning. It was not I don't think it was a post that actually went up on Wowhead, but Squishy DM'd it to us with some of the dungeon tuning. The two dungeons that got the most amount of tuning were like Everbloom and Waycrest Manor.
Yeah, I would say just the first round probably of tuning. I'm sure that there will be a wave for each of these dungeons.
Most of it was natural scaling. I would say the big thing is like Heartsbane Triad got nerfed in Waycrest Manor, and functionally how that boss itself worked received a pretty substantial nerf. I think that overall though, Waycrest's big thing, I think it has two problems potentially. One, Sanguine, just as an affix, Sanguine worked horribly in that key. I hope that it gets fixed.
Also a problem with Black Rook Hold as well.
That's true. We're going to cover that in a second. And I think the other one is the doors, like you talked about earlier. I think that I would like to see all of the doors open at once. That would be my perfect world.
Yeah, if I couldn't have that, I think I would prefer
consistent door. One consistent door.
Yeah, just pick one door and have it always be open. Like have that be the way to do it. Like Freehold, there was one captain. Although Freehold, the captains used to be weekly, whereas now it's the doors used to be random every time you started the key in Waycrest, which was so tilting. I'm glad that's. I hope that's not how it works.
The problem with Waycrest with the random doors is that Huntsman Lodge room was the second fastest route. The first fastest route was Heartsbane Triad Rush, and then the top right route, which was like you had a double witch or something like that. It was like a bunch of like random garbage, and you had to run around, was something in the order of like a 1.5 minute penalty over the other options, which was a bit brutal.
Yeah. Also, there was something nice about just getting Heartsbane Triad out of the way. Now, hopefully they nerf that boss to the point where it's like, and there already are nerfs up for this that mean that boss is a little bit less relatively difficult to the rest of the dungeon, which means whenever you have a relatively difficult boss in M+, it doesn't actually, like people will hear us ask for those sorts of bosses to get nerfed, and they're like, oh, you want M plus to be easier? But because M plus is infinitely scaling, if there is one hard boss in a dungeon, it kind of just means that okay, you'll do the key at a level where that boss is hard, and then the rest of the dungeon's easy, right? But if the bosses are all more equal, then you just push the key level up until they're all hard, and
I
that's
I think
my favorite way to play.
in my opinion, it kind of depends on the manner at which it was hard.
Yeah,
Triad was a weird one where if you didn't push the boss fast enough, and like there was some weird stuff with mind controlling and whatnot, that dungeon or the boss in particular wasn't exactly in my mind, the right form of difficulty. I think that they can keep things such as the nettles being challenging, assuming that's not like one-shotting players and it's like the right kind of challenging. And I think like the AOE damage and like the ambient damage that's going on to the group can also be challenging on that fight. I just think that like you really need to look at like pushing the boss at a specific time, not having the dark ritual cast go off, that kind of thing as being the difficulty point, and like what does that mean for it. Okay, moving forward, Darkheart Thicket and Blackrook Hold. These are two dungeons that got refurbed a little bit, actually a decent amount coming into Legion Time Walking, yeah?
yeah. Which that experiment was so I think underplayed that a lot of people aren't even really familiar, or mostly still remember the Legion versions of those dungeons rather than the Legion Time Walking versions. But Blackrook, yeah, they messed with count a lot compared to what you might remember from Legion. So you need to do that count at the beginning now, which is again that lines up with what we said about a straight line route hitting 100%. Rather than going way over. So that does, I think, make a good change there, although some of the trash in that dungeon is still kind of annoying.
I will say that the trash in that dungeon, assuming that the archers aren't outrangeable and one-shot melee, is mostly okay. I will say that this is a typical Hold W dungeon. The bosses present a large challenge, especially in like infinite scaling content where you have things such as can you survive the one shot on Amalgamation of Souls? Can you survive the one shot on the final boss? What's the deal with like the stomp rotation and getting charged into on the third boss? Those are the kind of things that you're really looking out for in Blackrook Hold. I feel like it has a lot of survivability checks just generally in this dungeon, and then on top of that, it has like decently difficult trash.
Yeah, those bosses, I mean, there's some iconically difficult Legion bosses in there, but again, they already all did get toned down a little bit going into time walking, so I suspect they won't be too unfair. Because I remember, like, the third boss or whatever, the one out on that balcony was really hard in Legion, and I remember it not being that bad at all in the time walking.
Mm-hmm. I think Darkheart Thicket's the one that's on my radar as, like, so we've had... So Shadow Moon Burial Grounds and Court of Stars, if you played in Season 1, were very easy. Like, multiple key levels easier than other dungeons. And this season you have... I would say Underrot is the main offender here, but also Neltharis to a lesser degree.
Yeah, Neltharis requires a bit more work to get to be super easy, but it is still super easy if you have a group that does all the things that make it easy, which there's a knowledge gap there.
Whereas Underrot released with a 32-minute timer, 33-minute timer, or something like that this season, and then got nerfed down to 30.
Yeah.
And it's like, that dungeon was, it still is one of the easiest dungeons to do. A lot of it comes off the back that it's not very deadly, kind of similar to what the issue was in Shadow Moon Burial Grounds, where a lot of the mobs just like, realistically, you weren't in any danger of dying or wiping to a lot of things. Not that you can't, but it's just like, the barrier to wiping was a lot lower than it was for other dungeons. And so I worry that Darkheart Thicket might be a similar way because how they changed it in Legion Time Walking. Basically in Legion, the only difficult part of the dungeon were the bosses and things such as, Oakheart, Draceron, and Shade of Xavius all had spammable one-shots, which was stupid. Like, it was not a fun mechanic. And they should have fixed it, and they fixed it for Legion Time Walking. But that trash in that dungeon also doesn't present, like, that much wipe potential outside of maybe, like, gimmicky cats at the beginning. There's, like, a lot of mobs that don't do very many mechanics. It's a tough one. I think that Darkheart Thicket maybe on the... You gotta, like, watch out for it, and hopefully that it doesn't end up, like, too easy.
Yeah, I am a little bit worried as well. Going back to the Underrot, like right before this season came out, there was a set of buffs to make Underrot harder it landed on stuff like the Maggot Breath doing more damage, and I don't think there's any amount of damage that the Maggot Frontal can do. Like it one shots at a reasonably low level now. but that sort of difficulty is never gonna make those dungeons hard, right? Like
tend to agree,
easily dodgeable mechanics, like that's gonna make them more lethal in pugs, which maybe also isn't the goal, right? But it's gonna make them less. It doesn't help make them scale equally with the other dungeons in terms of difficulty.
No, I'm not. What I'm not advocating for is like every trash pack to be hard or like a grueling challenge. I'm just saying
Right.
like there needs to be some lethality into the dungeon where you're like, I'm losing the dungeon here. Not Temple of the Jade Serpent esque where every trash pack was an absolute.
It is a tough balancing act, right? And a lot of it is also relative to the other dungeons in the pool, right? 'Cause
Yes.
you don't want there to be outliers in either direction across a whole dungeon.
And this is like reactions before we've seen the dungeons tested on the PTR. Even,
right, exactly. This is like we think this might be the problem with them, not we're asserting that this will be the problem or anything.
Darkheart Thickets count is also a bit jank. Whenever you played it back in Legion, you would go to like 150% count if you pulled every mob holding W. Maybe not 150, but like you would skip massive portions of both the beginning and that log.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I don't remember if they changed that one as well in Time Walking, but we'll have to see what the plan is here. Because usually they don't like dungeons where you go over 100 anymore with holding W. So,
Everbloom. Any thoughts on Everbloom? It's been a CM most recently.
So I wasn't like WoD was one of the expansions I played the least of.
Okay.
So I don't really have much. I know there was a skip that like everybody used in Everbloom CM that's been fixed since then during Time Walking. So that's all I know though.
I mean, it's been a very long time since I did WoD, right? Like I have like WoD CM golds for Everbloom, but I didn't push times or do anything that was super challenging back then. There
was like some skip you did where you jumped up over something in the middle of the dungeon.
There were multiple like seesaw skips and like wall jumps and stuff like that. But both of those have been patched. Like all of that's been patched basically since then. I would say the third boss, Archmage Soul, has a decent chance of being quite challenging. I think that boss just in general is pretty hard. Everbloom also has a decent amount of casters, just generally. I don't know what it's going to look like. I think this is a dungeon that I'm not exactly sure what to expect, but I think it has a lot of depth in a way that the other Warlords of Draenor dungeons haven't had. And you think
I
of, like,
remember
Warlords
this was a common choice among like the high-end M plus community when they brought that poll of like, hey, which WoD dungeon should we do in Shadowlands Season 4? I remember people being very mad among the like high-end community that Everbloom wasn't chosen and Grimrail Depot was.
Well, if you think, I mean, and Iron Docks, if you think about Iron Docks had 2 kicks in the whole entire dungeon, right?
Yeah.
Everbloom Wilds is not like that. Everbloom Wilds is definitely like a dungeon that has interrupts and
dude, it's a shame Iron Docks didn't come out with the new talent system because you could untalent your interrupt in that place. That'd be good.
That would be good, actually. Wait a second.
Yeah, save a point. Hang on.
Okay.
Bring it back.
Final dungeon. I think the dungeon that we probably have by far the least to say about this because this is something that you just like have to wait and see. Throne of the Tides. What are you thinking about this one?
Yeah. Throne of the Tides. Throne of the Tides is a 5-player dungeon in the Abyssal Maw.
Where's that?
Which is entered through the Abyssal Breach located in Vashir, which was introduced in World of Warcraft Cataclysm.
Okay.
Yeah. The great elemental lord Neptulon the Tidehunter has surveyed and protected his aquatic domain for ages, but he now faces his greatest challenge as a force of serpentine naga and malefic faceless ones threaten to depose him, leaving his realm and its secrets ripe for the plundering.
You're gonna make people think that that's actually all we know about the dungeon.
No, so it's got an interesting structure to it, and it does have a degree of like forced backtracking and elevator RP in the way that it was played.
It's whole W
like, originally,
too, right?
Yeah, it is. There's no open areas where you could choose what to pull. Really, it is pretty much these are all the packs. Fight them.
Yeah.
I believe that this one mechanically and pathing wise is definitely a candidate for getting some overhaul.
This is a fresh paint
like,
job.
I hope that this one is getting the majority of not the majority, but is getting an outsized share of the dev time that these dungeons get this season.
Well, only other Cata dungeon we've actually seen was Vortex Pinnacle. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I thought that was sort of mid to good.
Okay.
Like B-, C+. dungeon. Is
Not
okay.
your favorite, but you're like, oh my god, it's
Yeah,
not like the
it was not
worst.
one that I despised. There were a couple parts of it that didn't really like, but overall, I thought it was reasonably good. And if I roll my key into it, it's not one of the ones where I'm sad, right?
Yeah.
It's not like
Um,
I didn't like when I rolled my key into Uldaman, for instance, but I was fine whenever it was Vortex Pinnacle.
I think the Dawns for me, by the way, the Dawns are very challenging, even on like M0 right now. I wonder what the scaling is going to look like with them. Historically, for Mega Dungeons, they've actually downscaled them to where like
And this is already in the game now, yeah, where the base damage of all abilities in Dawn of the Infinite is higher on current M0 than it will be on like +2
yeah,
next season. Like that, it was basically set up such that a M0 of that thing was like a 15 or something this season in terms of what it'll actually be scaled like when it becomes M
uh,
plus. So you don't have to worry about it being super giga overscaled. Uh, they have the tech now to prevent that happening.
sure. I think that for Dawn, it's like this is a wait and see like angle, kind of similar to Throne of the Tides. It's like been way too long to even project anything.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think that one's also one where there probably will be some mechanics that need to get looked at in M plus when it comes out, but because
let's
this, unlike all the other dungeons, this will be its first time. I guess Throne of the Tides didn't have an M plus or anything, but
sure.
so those two dungeons are the ones that haven't had an M plus or challenge mode that will need the most like I think a few weeks worth of tuning patches to like, oh, this ability is doing twice as much damage as it should. Let's change that.
So let's talk timers. Pretty long timers, just as a general rule for this season. We have 4 39 minutes with Waycrest Manor, Black Cold, and both of the Dawn of the Infinite dungeons being all those 39 minutes. Then we have 3 30s with Atal'Dazar, Darkheart Thicket, and Throne of the Tides clocking in at 30. And then we have Everbloom at 35. So typically with the WAD CM dungeons, they all started at like like the 35-minute mark, which was like their gold time, or not their gold time, it was like their bronze time, and then the timer got adjusted. I remember Temple of the Jade Serpent started out with like some stupid timer because that was like their bronze split time. So I don't know if this is like a permanent 35 or this is just like a placeholder 35. Overall,
Yeah,
though,
I mean, this is like the first. These numbers have
yeah.
changed before the dungeons have come out in previous seasons. Yeah.
I mean, these are long dungeons though, relative to kind of what we've seen.
Yeah. So 39 is on the longer end. There's 4 of those. There's also 330s though, which is the shortest that we see aside from Maw of Souls. Um, I don't know. I mean, it's not like Shadowlands, BFA, Legion all had dungeons over 40 minutes. This expansion still hasn't had any of those. And this expansion has had 40-minute timers
Yeah.
in previous seasons, and this season doesn't have any of those. So I don't think it's that bad. The average is pretty much the same as always. It's
I
just
will.
kind of some long, some short instead of a bunch of 35s.
It's a minute longer on average than season 2 dungeons,
Right, which, yeah, is,
which was a little bit longer than
very
season 1
close.
dungeons, right? On average.
Yeah, but again, like you have 330s, 439s, and then a 35, right? Like that's
Yeah.
I don't know. If you compare that to any BFA or Legion or Shadowland season, it's still shorter.
I was talking to a mutual friend of
42s.
ours, and they were saying that actually dungeons should never be over 30 minutes long, and in fact, the optimal dungeon time would be 25 minutes. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I like shorter dungeons. I think that when they get too short, like I think 30 is a good time. I think that I like that. I like it when dungeons are 30. I'm not sure. Like, I didn't like how Maw of Souls worked as the only really short dungeon. Maybe if they were all that time, but I feel like if you get to a point where there's, like, if you have a season where there's outlier times by a huge amount, then that becomes a problem where it either feels really bad to roll that dungeon or it's the only dungeon you roll for if you're farming for, crests or vault slots or whatever. So,
Sure.
I don't know. For me, if every dungeon is around 30, that's good. The ones that are 39 this season, like, yeah, it's a little long. I wish those were a little
35,
shorter, but
yeah.
it's not like when we have those 45-minute dungeons, those are the ones where I'm like, ah.
It's just tough because like a lot of, I would say, video game culture and just like video games in general have moved away from like I take an hour to do a one piece of content model, and they moved more into the I take 30 minutes to 45 minutes to do one piece of content model. It's just like,
Yeah, it would be an interesting experiment to do shorter dungeons, although, if they did an expansion where they made 8 shorter dungeons, they would have a hard time of doing returning dungeons that expansion, right? Because all the returning dungeons would have to be like really reworked to be shorter.
I don't know.
But I'd be down to see what that looked like.
I don't know. It's a tough one. Okay. So just in general, I mean, we talked about balancing. Any notable items that you want to see? I think that I have one, and you can kind of think of if you want. I have the Amalgam Seventh Spine for the class.
Okay.
And this is so whenever Legion Time Walking was a thing, this was a trinket that healers would farm pretty regularly. Basically, it gives you back a significant amount of mana whenever you directly heal targets, right? It reads, your direct healing spells apply Echo for 6 seconds. Whenever Echo expires, it restores 12 mana to you. And it has like main stat on it. It was a steep amount of mana. Now, they specifically...
I suspect this is nerfed, yeah?
Yeah, they specifically stated they're looking to nerf mana gains this patch. So...
Yeah, I doubt this will be as much of a mana pool as it used to be.
Yep.
But yeah, that's a good trinket. For me, actually, the most powerful ones are the Dawn of the Infinite ones, like the Cheat Death trinket in there.
Oh, yeah?
Is so super sick.
What's the name of that one?
I don't know.
Cheat Death trinket, Dawn of the Infinite.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's really good, though. It gives you, like, haste when it procs.
Any of the
is
time
nice.
strike stuff you're interested in?
Yeah, Time Strike's going to be good. I mean, all of the weapons that just get bonus value without costing any eye level, now that you can get them on the hero track and myth track, are going to be bis for a lot of people if the raid weapons with the effects aren't bis for your spec, which I guess that remains to be seen as well. But these will be really good options, yeah.
You also have notable favorites such as the Midas Talisman or the Vial of
Talisman from Atal'Dazar. Yeah, let's go. It's back.
We got the Vial of Skittering Shadows as well, which is also
yeah, Atal'Dazar had some kind of beans trinkets, huh?
They were awful.
Not a good dungeon for the old trinkets.
No, absolute horrible trinkets.
Darkheart had an interesting tank trinket. There was like Heart of Darkness or something.
I just remember the Gnarled Root.
Yeah.
Well, I remember. All right. Any final thoughts on the dungeons? I think overall we're pretty positive on these, yeah?
Yeah. I'm looking forward to these. You know, again, like we've listed some concerns that we have with them, but overall I'm excited for it. And even if they don't do all these things, these are just things that jump to our minds as like, what are our first reactions when we hear Atal'Dazar's coming back, right? Is like, oh, maybe like Atal'Dazar was fun, and it would be so fun if the honor guards weren't the way they were, right? Or, you know, whatever.
How does it look like without Awakened? Like that kind of thing is like something
right, which we did play without Awakened in that dungeon for many seasons, but yeah.
I mean, yeah. All right. That's it for us today. We will be back next week?
Next week?
Yeah. All right. We'll be back next week.
Well, actually, I guess maybe next week. Yeah.
Maybe next week. Anyways, we'll see you guys later. Goodbye.
Bye.